Hello to all, bonjour à tous. Je suis Boris Prou, reporter pour Le Devoir, et je serai le modérateur de cette conférence de presse qui réunit aujourd'hui le ministre Harjit Sajjan, Minister of International Development and Minister responsible for the Pacific Economic Development Agency of Canada. He is on the stage with Anita Vandenbeld, the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Development, et Arielle Kayabaga, qui est députée de London West. We will take questions first in the room and then on Zoom, so if you are attending online, please use the raise hand function at any point during this press conference, and I'll hand you the mic. On that, Minister, you have the floor.
Good morning, bienvenue, Kwe. I would first like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I'm really grateful to be here today as we reaffirm our government's commitment to our feminist agenda and as we outline the future of Canada's Women, Voice and Leadership program. In a moment, Minister Sajjan will speak more about that. But first, let me say how transformational this program has been for women and girls around the world. J'ai pu le constater lors d'un récent séjour en Afrique. Cette politique produit des résultats concrets et à long terme dans le monde entier, en particulier dans les communautés les plus vulnérables où les femmes sont souvent marginalisées. This work is more crucial now than it has ever been, and this is because we're seeing a growing backlash against women's rights, driven in part by the rise of anti-feminist populism, even here in Canada. Our government is unapologetically feminist, and I'm very proud to be here with my colleagues, Minister Sajjan and MP Kayabaga, to talk more about Women's Voice and Leadership 2.0. Minister Sajjan, over to you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you for also for your tireless work in the international development space. I want to also acknowledge your work that you've done with the United Nations and promoting equality all over the world. So thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with everyone. I'd like to begin also acknowledging that we are gathered on the ancestral and ceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Now, this is a very important day for Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, and one that has been in the making for some time. On that point, I would like to thank my friend and colleague, Mary-Claude Bibeau, who was the minister at that time, who unveiled the Feminist International Assistance Policy 6 years ago and set the course for this day in motion. Now, this was not an easy feat. Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy was first of its kind and continues to pave the way for the rest of the world. Our Feminist International Assistance Policy signaled a fundamental change for Canada's international assistance. Now, everywhere I go, and I hear the same thing, that the world needs and wants more of Canada. Now, there are those that may say that this is not true. They believe that the interest of Canadians lies solely within our borders. But when Canadians lift up the most vulnerable around the world, when we stand up for women's rights and the rights of the most marginalized, when we fight for equality and equity and progress, when we create opportunities to foster peace, we understand why we hear the world needs more of Canada. Women and girls in all their diversity are now front and center in Canada's effort to reduce poverty and inequality and to build a more prosperous world. And despite all the challenges we have faced since then, I am proud to say that with Canada's Women's Voice and Leadership program, we are living up to that vision. Women's Voice and Leadership is a flagship initiative to support women's rights and organization LGBTQI+ groups tackling inequality in 31 countries and regions around the world. And this initiative is also central to our policy commitment to target 15% of Canada's official development assistance directly towards gender equality programming. Now, a product of collaborative partnerships between Canadian implementing partners and local organizations on the ground, Women's Voice and Leadership projects provide direct locally led support for women, girls, and gender diverse people who are too often left out of the conversation. They're left out of policy decisions that impact them and left out of opportunities to lead discussions and set the agenda. So I'm talking about human rights defenders, survivors of gender-based violence, Indigenous women, racial and ethnic minorities, domestic workers, migrant workers, rural women, women living with HIV or AIDS, and women with disabilities. The first phase of Women's Voice and Leadership far exceeded our expectations. We worked with more than 1,500 women's rights organizations. Now that was triple the number that we had originally planned. And today, I'm here to say that we are just getting started. Today, I am announcing $195 million over 5 years and $43.3 million annually on an ongoing basis to renew and expand the Women's Voice and Leadership Program. This increased funding is a key contribution to advancing the objectives of the Feminist International Assistance Policy and the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. It is also an important step forward on the path to more locally led development. And there is strong evidence that putting predictable, sustainable, and mandate-aligned funding in the hands of women's rights organizations and supporting them to take action on their priorities is the best way to make a lasting impact. And with today's announcement, hundreds of women's rights organizations will be able to continue to work to advance their priorities as they define them, and to have the flexibility to respond to emerging needs in their own communities, including those facing conflict and crisis, regrettably what we see around the world. By funding women's rights organizations substantially and in a sustained, predictable way, Canada is supporting these organizations as they step forward and drive change. Just in 2022 alone, organizations supported through Women's Voice and Leadership influenced over 100 equality-focused policies, laws, and frameworks. Now let me highlight just a few of these achievements. So in Peru, women's rights organizations successfully advocated for the regional government of Puno to pass 2 ordinances. One, to prevent sexual harassment in public spaces and hold perpetrators to account, and 2, to create a regional observatory on violence against women and family members. In St. Lucia, our partner, Raise Your Voice, saw progress through the passing of the Domestic Violence Act 2022, alongside other civil society organizations. Now, this law extended legal protection to people in same-sex relationships who experience domestic violence. In South Sudan, our project participants acted as policy monitors to ensure 35% representation for women in governance bodies at both state and national levels under the revitalized peace agreement. So when I think of this work and the work of the countless peoples working to build a better future for women and girls, their families, and their communities, I am hopeful for a brighter, safer, and more equitable future. But sadly, in many parts of the world, even right here in North America, we are seeing backsliding on women's rights and rising attacks against women human rights defenders. When it comes to women's rights, our government is unapologetically pro-choice. These pervasive issues have an effect on women around the world as they can be taken away swiftly, and if not fought for or safeguarded, as we have just seen this, it's just south of our border. So let me be clear on this point. The Conservatives continue to look for ways to reopen the debate on abortion access. And unlike them, we will never be silent on these issues. We are seeing how conflict, the long tail of COVID-19, and a growing number of climate-related humanitarian emergencies are increasing this risk. And as Canada's Minister of International Defense, I've seen our gender equality projects at work. And I have witnessed firsthand the barriers that prevents women and girls from completing their education and finding good quality jobs. This prevents women from having their say on issues that impacts their lives and their livelihoods, and not to mention in their own communities, their families, and even their own bodies. In the face of these considerable challenges, it is clear to me that if we care about human rights, democracy, and equality, we need more than ever to support the grassroots organizations on the front lines of the fight for gender equality. So today's announcement, is a recommitment of our government's unapologetic stance to be feminist. We will not waver on this at home or around the world. The Women's Voice in Leadership program is transformational, impactful, and bold. And I look forward to seeing the future impacts of the Women's Voice in Leadership program. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. And I'll pass it off to my good friend, Arielle.
Thank you, Minister. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Comme le ministre vient de le mentionner, c'est une journée très importante pour la politique d'aide internationale féministe du Canada et est une journée qui se préparait depuis bien longtemps. J'aimerais prendre le temps de réitérer les points du ministre. Comme vous le savez, la politique d'aide internationale féministe est une politique pionnière. C'est la première du genre et elle continue à ouvrir la voie d'autres à travers le monde. Nous l'avons vu tout récemment avec l'Allemagne qui a commencé son propre programme grâce au Canada. Les filles et les femmes, dans toute leur diversité, sont au cœur des efforts du Canada pour réduire la pauvreté ainsi que l'inégalité, pour en bâtir un monde plus propre et plus prospère pour tous. Malgré tous ces défis auxquels nous avons été confrontés, je suis fière de dire que le programme canadien Voix et leadership des femmes est à la hauteur de cette vision. Voix et leadership des femmes est une initiative phare visant à soutenir les organisations de défense des droits des femmes et les groupes LGBTQI+, qui luttent contre les inégalités dans 31 pays et régions. Donc, fruit d'une collaboration entre les partenaires de mise en œuvre canadiens et des organisations locales sur le terrain, les projets du programme Voix et leadership des femmes apportent un soutien direct et local aux femmes, aux filles et aux personnes de différents genres qui sont trop souvent tenues à l'écart de la conversation. Donc, laissées à l'écart des décisions politiques qui les concernent et qui n'ont pas la possibilité de mener des discussions et de définir les enjeux qui les mèneront à leur propre succès. La première phase de Voix et leadership des femmes a largement dépassé les attentes. Nous avons travaillé avec plus de 1500 organisations de défense des droits des femmes, et soit 3 fois plus que nous avons prévu à l'origine. Comme vous le savez, nous venons d'annoncer 195 millions de dollars sur 5 ans et 43,3 millions de dollars par an par la suite, sur une base continue pour renouveler et étendre le programme Voix et leadership des femmes. Donc, ce financement accru est une contribution essentielle à la réalisation des objectifs de la politique d'aide internationale féministe et du plan d'action national sur les femmes, la paix et la sécurité. Il s'agit également d'une étape importante sur la voie d'un développement davantage pris en charge au niveau local. Donc, il est prouvé qu'un financement prévisible, durable et conforme au mandat entre les mains des organisations de défense des droits des femmes et à les aider à agir sur leurs propres priorités, c'est le meilleur moyen d'avoir un impact durable sur la génération actuelle et celle à venir. Donc, grâce à cette annonce faite aujourd'hui, donc, des centaines d'organisations de défense des droits des femmes pourront continuer à travailler pour faire avancer leurs priorités, telles que les définissent, et avoir une flexibilité nécessaire pour répondre aux besoins émergents dans leur propre communauté, y compris celles qui sont confrontées à des conflits de crise. Rien qu'en 2022, les organisations soutenues par ce programme ont influencé plus de 100 politiques, des lois et des cadres annexés qui sont visés à l'égalité. À Saint-Lucie, comme l'a mentionné le ministre tout à l'heure, notre partenaire Raise Your Voice a contribué à l'adoption de la loi de 2022 sur la violence domestique aux côtés d'autres organisations de la société civile. Et cette loi a aussi étendu les protections juridiques aux personnes vivant dans des relations homosexuelles qui subissent des violences domestiques. Au Soudan du Sud, les participants à ce projet ont agi en tant que contrôleurs politiques pour garantir une représentation de 35% de femmes dans les organes de gouvernance, tant au niveau de l'État et qu'au niveau national, dans le cadre d'accords de paix et de revitaliser. Donc, lorsque je pense à ce travail et à celui des innombrables personnes qui œuvrent à la construction d'un avenir meilleur pour les femmes et les filles et leurs familles et leurs communautés, j'ai l'espoir d'un avenir qui est plus radieux, plus sûr et plus équitable. Mais malheureusement, dans nombreuses régions du monde et même ici en Amérique du Nord, chez nos voisins et alliés les plus proches, les États-Unis, nous assistons à un recul des droits des femmes et à une augmentation des attaques contre les défenseuses et les défenseurs des droits humains. nous constatons que les conflits, la longue traîne du COVID-19 et de nombreuses croissances d'urgence humanitaires liées au climat augmentent les risques. Et de la même façon dont on a vu l'opposition de s'attaquer aux services de base pour les francophones comme Radio-Canada, qui va dans nos communautés pour nous informer et pour s'assurer que les Canadiens reçoivent de l'information dans leur langue de choix, nous savons que c'est de cette même façon qu'ils vont s'attaquer aux droits fondamentaux des femmes canadiennes. Heureusement pour nous, les francophones du Canada et hors du Québec, le projet de loi C13 a été annoncé hier par le Premier ministre, qui est une grande promesse de la campagne électorale qui va faire de grands pas et changements dans nos communautés. Face à ces défis considérables, il me semble évident que si nous nous soucions des droits humains, de la démocratie et de l'inégalité, nous devons plus que jamais soutenir les organisations qui sont en première ligne de la lutte de l'égalité des sexes et nous en remettre aux droits et à la voix des femmes et des jeunes filles dans toute leur diversité. Aujourd'hui, notre gouvernement réaffirme sa position, sans équivoque sur les questions féministes. Nous ne faiblirons pas sur ce point, que ce soit ici ou au reste du monde. Le programme de voix et leadership des femmes est un programme de transformation, d'impact, d'audace. Et je tiens à remercier tout le monde qui a été impliqué dans ce travail et tout leur travail acharné. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. So we'll take questions. First, one question and one follow-up, of course, in the room, and then we'll go on Zoom. David Baxter, you can go ahead. Global News.
The federal budget was tabled, and there we saw about a $1.3 billion decrease in the international aid fund. What's your message to NGOs and other partners that you work with who may be worried about what this means for their future funding, and what have you been hearing from folks in that space over the past month?
No, thank you very much for the question, and I'll have to clarify. And I have had many discussions with different organizations already to clarify the question. One of the things is that we in Canada, our government is absolutely committed for increasing our international development assistance funding. In fact, actually, it was right in the actual budget. So, for example, if I can just read from the budget 2023 projected the international assistance envelope to reach $6.8 billion by 2023-24, a 49% increase from 2015 to 16. And I'll also say, as I try to explain to them, this is a baseline budget that we get. And just you'll know the next week I'll be going to for Committee for Main Estimates to talk about the mainline budget that I'll be requesting. But the question that's being asked, so how we're assessing this is, we're doing the end of the year from previous year, but we're asking the question for the start of the year. So I think, to be fair, on the question will be, when you get to the end of this year, we'll determine exactly what the funding will be. And keep in mind, the mainline budget allows us to keep programs going. So, for example, no programs have been cut. In fact, what you see is, as new emergencies or other programs come online, or the planning that we do, there will be other increases to the funding, just like we've done in previous years.
Previous interviews about this topic, you've mentioned that this year's funding is still above the baseline level for the 2019 budget. So would it be fair to characterize some of the increases we've seen over the past couple budgets as part of that emergency funding that was necessary during the pandemic?
So obviously, I mean, when it came to the pandemic, we had to increase funding inside Canada to support our population, but we also had a responsibility to support the most vulnerable internationally as well. So we had to increase funding there. But now what we are getting into a baseline funding to making sure that our core programming that focuses on our key programs, for example, education, food security, health, and especially SRHR. We're focused on this to making sure that we have the appropriate impact. Plus, we do need to be mindful, as you mentioned, all the different emergencies that do come up, and our government has always stepped up at times of need. I mean, Ukraine is just the most recent example, but having also said that, the food security crisis that has been amplified because of the Ukraine crisis, our government also put in a $250 million support that was actually originally not in the budget. So our government always respond to those needs, because I think Canadians expect for us to have an important role in the world to support the most vulnerable. And I think most people also, especially Canadian NGOs, understand what happens around the world impacts all of us.
Merci beaucoup. On va sur Zoom. Dylan Robertson, Canadian Press. Over to you.
Hi there. Thanks for taking our questions. Just sort of in the same vein, you've got this 15% cut to ODA, and I guess I'm just wondering if this new funding is going to replace those expiring Charlevoix initiatives, given that there was nothing in the budget that said that those were actually going to stay in place.
No, first of all, thanks for the question, Dylan. But as I stated, this is not a cut into our funding. In fact, the programs do continue, and some of the education programs that were in Charlevoix, we have actually extended, and we are looking at other options on how to fund additional programs. But one thing I want to make very clear: our government's commitment to continually to increase our ODA. It was mentioned in the throne speech a number of years ago, and it's actually in the budget itself. The budget at this time is a start of the year baseline funding to keep the core funding programs moving forward. But through this, there will be other initiatives that we are currently working on when we have an actual plan. And one of the key things is you just don't request funding for a project that you're going to do. You need to have an actual thorough plan and have that focus, because one of the things is very clear is we want to make sure that people's lives get better. We are seeing an increase in conflict all over the world. And in my time as Minister of National Defense, one thing I've seen is when things are not under control, we end up dealing with conflict. The work that we do in international development, done properly, especially through a feminist lens, ends up making people's lives better. When people's lives are better, it is more difficult in areas for nefarious actors to create the situation. And then we have to deal with all these crises. So what we always need to do is we need to come up with a thorough plan. And that's what we have been doing, whether it's with the main budget to focus in our funding on the key programs that we have ongoing, or look at new initiatives or programs that we have already been doing, but the 2.0 version like we are doing with the Women's Voice and Leadership program.
Thank you. And Minister, the Spotlight Initiative wants us to be a major financial contributor, and I'm wondering if that's something you're asking Cabinet to approve.
Sorry, can you repeat that question again, please?
Yeah, the Spotlight Initiative. They want us to be a major financial contributor to the Spotlight Initiative, the UN Women program, and I'm just wondering if that's something you're asking Cabinet to approve.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it isn't popping in my mind exactly which program, but overall, when it comes to the different UN agencies, as you know, that we fund many of them. We do obviously through our programming are focused on making sure that we have the appropriate gender equity levels within our programming. But we have always stepped up, and in fact, actually, we're speaking with many different organizations, and I was just on the phone with multiple UN organizations just to deal with the Sudan conflict. But I'm happy to kind of take this question offline and provide greater details just so I can have more clarity on it if you like.
Merci. We'll go over to Marina von Stackelberg, CBC.
Good morning. NGOs say you cut foreign aid by 15% in the last budget. Is that true?
No.
Can you extrapolate? And that's kind of my second question.
The reason I really want to express. I've talked to many different organizations to explain from the budgeting side. The core funding that we have, the certain programs that we have are currently ongoing. We are not cutting any programs. We're still committed to providing funding. And the funding for international development, the budget is the main portion for funding our main programming. I can't tell you exactly where the other funding will increases, but one thing I can say is that we are committed to this, and I look forward to having the discussion at the end of the year of where our funding and support will be. And if you look at previous years of how much where we actually the funding that was requested in the baseline budget early to what we had to do at the end of the year. That is a much better indication on this. And when we talk to the different organizations, one of the key things that we actually discuss is actually the different programming that we have. And how do we make sure that the good programming not only continues, how do we actually amplify certain programs, and certain programs where we need to make changes, we make those changes. But no, this is not a cut.
And my follow-up question, why is the government funding women's organizations in developing nations when it will not extend funding in this country to women's shelters who say it is absolutely needed and life-saving?
First of all, I'll just open this up, and I'd like to pass this question also off to my parliamentary secretary. One is, we are absolutely committed to providing support, $500 million of support for inside Canada. This is something that not only we're championing outside internationally, but we are championing inside as well. And we're not going to be unapologetic for this, but I know that my parliamentary secretary has a lot more information that she could provide.
Yes, no, thank you for that question. And I think on both of these issues, you're looking at some sort of misleading mathematics. So for women's programs during the pandemic, we provided $300 million, and that was really specifically for pandemic spending, for shelters to stay open at a time when it was really difficult for women to find safe places when everybody was locked at home. So that $300 million, of course, was pandemic spending. But there's still now, under our National Action Plan on Violence Against Women, a significant budget, $500 million that we are working with the provinces, hopefully to be able to have, because obviously the provinces have to be part of this, but that funding is going to continue, it's going to be long-term, and that's something that, I know that Minister Yen is working on and probably going to be able to announce soon once we have all of the provinces together. But just to be clear, that when they say that it's being cut, that's specific pandemic spending. We're looking at creating more money over a longer term. And the same thing with the development budget. I think, if you look at the baseline budget on international development, over the years since 2015, it's gone up 49%, including the 2023 budget. What happened during the pandemic is that we did billions in extra spending, bringing vaccines to the world, therapies, making sure health systems were reinforced. So you've got this bump, and then if you say, well, from that, you're going back to that baseline, now you've cut. But it isn't a cut, because if there were other pandemics or emergencies, there's always going to be the opportunity to be able to increase if it's needed. But we've actually increased year over year, and as the minister said, in budget 2023, it is clear in the budget we will continue to do that till 2030.
Voilà qui complète cette conférence de presse. Je ne vois plus d'autres questions. So that puts an end to this press conference. Mesdames, messieurs, monsieur le ministre, merci beaucoup pour avoir pris le temps. Bonne journée.